You know that classic image of a soldier wearing armor, holding a shield, a sword, and heavy boots on his feet? Well, when it comes to the Romans, forget the boots. What they actually wore were sandals. That's right, sandals. And before you think that sounds like a weird choice for someone going to war, let me explain why it was a brilliant move. These sandals had a name, Caligae, and they weren't some delicate little walking sandals. They were built to take a beating, endure endless marches, and handle rough terrain. They were the kind of footwear that breathed with the soldier's foot, and that made all the difference. Think about it. Most Roman battles took place in very hot regions. Blazing sun, dust, dry roads. Imagine spending the whole day with your feet trapped in closed boots, sweating nonstop. That just wouldn't work. You'd get blisters, fungus, infections. Total disaster. That's where the Roman sandal came in. It let the foot breathe, dried quickly, and prevented all that suffering. And here's the curious part. The footwear became part of their identity. You could hear the sound of their sandals marching from far away, like war drums. When a people heard that sound, they already knew the empire was coming. Hold up. Before we continue, I need your help. YouTube only shows this video to more people if there's a lot of interaction. So without your comment, this knowledge might get buried and never reach those who need it. If this content makes sense to you, comment 1. If you disagree, comment 0 and tell me why. I want to see at least 100 comments here so YouTube understands that this topic deserves to be shared. So leave your comment now and become part of this mission to reveal the secrets of ancient Rome. Alright, now let's move on. Imagine marching all day under the blazing sun, with dust up to your knees. That's what Roman soldiers did. And it wasn't just a walk in the park. It was dozens of kilometers, every day. That's why their footwear couldn't slow them down. The sandal, unlike what we think today, gave freedom. It was light, airy, molded to the foot, and allowed the soldier to move more quickly. And here's the detail. Each one had a thick sole with iron nails underneath. That's right. Those nails gave extra grip on the ground, like tires nailed to your feet. Genius, right? While enemies wore heavy boots or walked barefoot, Romans could run, change direction, climb rocks, and cross trails without losing rhythm. That made a huge difference in combat. The Roman army was like a finely tuned machine, and every detail, even the sandal, mattered. Have you ever heard the sound of hundreds of people marching at once? Now imagine that multiplied by 1,000, and with iron nails hitting the ground. That was the sound of the Caligae, and it wasn't just background noise. It was practically a psychological weapon. For many people living in the empire's provinces, hearing that sound meant one thing. The Romans were coming, and when they came, they didn't come to play. There are records showing that just the sound of the sandals hitting stone made enemies nervous. In some regions, like among the Jews, people even started banning this kind of sandal within their communities because it triggered terrifying memories. Those hiding or on the run thought it meant an invasion was starting. And it wasn't an exaggeration. The Roman army was known for its discipline, and the synchronized sound of marching became a symbol of strength, of power, almost like a message. We're coming. Get ready. These sandals, which might seem simple today, had the power to intimidate entire armies, just by the sound they made. Even with all those advantages, the Caligae weren't perfect, and sometimes even what works well can become a problem, depending on the situation. There's a story recorded by the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus that shows this in a tragic way. During an attack on the temple in Jerusalem, a Roman centurion, a respected commander, was advancing when he slipped on the marble floor. The reason? The sandal's sole, full of nails, didn't have enough traction on that smooth surface. And guess what happened? He fell and was immediately killed by rebels. That shows how even the Romans, with all their organization and military intelligence, could be caught off guard by simple details. What was an advantage on the road, the iron nails, became a disadvantage on polished stone, but the Romans were quick learners. And incidents like that, rare as they were, ended up being taken into account in future strategies. After all, every battle taught them something, and even the most practical sandal in the world needed adjustments when the setting changed. The soldiers' relationship with their sandals was so strong that it ended up becoming a nickname. Yes, they were called Caligae, which means something like those who wear Caligae. It wasn't just about practicality, it was part of who they were. The sound, the shape, even the way they walked in those sandals became symbols of what it meant to be a Roman legionary. And here's a fun fact. That nickname went so far that even an emperor was marked by it. The young Gaius, grandson of Augustus, earned the nickname Caligula, which means little sandal, because as a child he lived among the soldiers and wore a miniature version of their military footwear. He became the troop's mascot. Years later, he became emperor. But that's another story. What matters here is how the Caligae went far beyond just an accessory. It was part of the Roman army's soul. It wasn't just about putting them on. It was about wearing the spirit of the legion. If this content is making sense to you so far, do me a favor. Give me a sign. Comment 1 below so I know you're with me on this journey. And remember, YouTube only spreads this knowledge if there's plenty of interaction. If you haven't commented yet, now's the time. I want to see. This video filled with opinion, so this topic keeps reaching more people. Now let's keep going. You're probably wondering, how did they make those sandals so tough? Well, the answer is simple and brilliant at the same time. Caligae were made of thick leather, usually from cows or oxen. The cool part is that they used a single piece of leather for both the upper part and the sole. That made the sandal stronger and easier to assemble. But the real secret was the iron nails they placed underneath. They were for traction, yes, but also for durability. When the nails wore down, which was common after so many marches, they could just be replaced. No need to throw away the whole sandal. And the smartest part? The soldiers themselves could repair their Caligae during campaigns using simple tools. That kept them from going barefoot in dangerous areas. In other words, the Romans thought of everything. Every part of the sandal had a reason. It was functional, practical, and cheap. 3 things every world-conquering army needs to consider. Until now, we've been talking about sun, heat, and dust. But what about when the Romans ended up in cold places with rain, mud, and biting wind? That's where the story changes a bit. The Caligae, which were great for the dry, hot Mediterranean climate, didn't hold up in the cold and damp regions like northern Britain or parts of Germania. Soldiers' feet froze, got soaked, and the real danger appeared. Illness, open wounds, serious infections. That's why, starting in the 2nd century AD, the Romans began replacing the Caligae with another type of footwear, the carbatina. These did cover the entire foot and ankle, made from a single piece of leather and tied with straps or cords. It was like they were saying, all right, the sandals worked up to now, but the mission has changed, and so have we. The Romans weren't stubborn. They adapted, and that was one of their keys to success. So yes, the Caligae were amazing, but even they weren't invincible. The cold taught the Romans that sometimes protection is more important than ventilation. What's interesting is that the carbatini, those closed boots designed to protect soldiers from the cold, didn't stay limited to the military for long. They were practical, warmed the feet, protected from rain and mud, and best of all, they were easy and cheap to mass produce. Soon enough, civilians started wearing them too. Romans, Greeks, even Celtic peoples. They became part of everyday life for many. You know how some things start in the military and later become street fashion? That's exactly what happened. The carbatina was tough, comfortable, and functional. No frills, and it worked for both war and daily life. So what began as a military necessity ended up becoming a trend throughout the empire. When the army needed to adapt, it found solutions. And sometimes, those solutions ended up on the people's feet. It's amazing to think how a simple piece of leather can carry so much history, isn't it? Over time, what began as an adaptation became the standard. By the end of the 4th century AD, the use of carbatine was practically mandatory across the Roman Empire. It was no longer just an option for cold places. It became the new normal. The sandals that once dominated the battlefields were slowly replaced by boots that fully covered and protected the foot. It reflected a new phase in the empire, facing different realities. More wars in the north, more travel in harsh climates, and a more diverse society. But that doesn't lessen the importance of the Caligae. Quite the opposite. They served their purpose for centuries, accompanied historic conquests, marched alongside generals like Caesar, Augustus, and Trajan, and left their mark. But the world changes, and the Romans, as always, changed with it. In the end, we realize it wasn't just a sandal. The Caligae represented the Roman way of waging war, efficient, practical, and brutally smart. Every detail was thought out. Nothing was by chance. They understood that even the feet had to be ready for battle. And maybe that's why they managed to build such a vast empire, connecting cultures, overcoming obstacles, and moving through the centuries with strategies that often began with the simplest things, like a sandal. Before you go, can you do me a favor? If this video taught you something new, hit that like button now. It tells YouTube this content is worth sharing, and it helps me keep bringing you stories like this. And hey, there's another video on the screen right now. Click it. There. You'll uncover a surprising detail from history that most people have never noticed, but that completely changes how we see the past. See you there.